In the 1980s, there was a cartoon strip called Bloom County. I don't know if anyone remembers. Okay, so somebody, okay. There was a character in that cartoon strip named Bill, and he was a cat. And Bill the cat, one of Bill's most uttered sentiments was ack. Ack. Now, ack was a sound that approximated the sound a cat makes when it's choking on a hairball. I'm just saying. So for me, this week, ack has been the sound of spiritual hairballs. Just utter frustration and choking fatigue with what is going on in our world at micro and macro levels. The failure of our senators to pass meaningful gun control. Ack. Multiple bombings at Boston's marathon. Ack. This morning's earthquake in China, 180 dead and rising. Ack. Cancer diagnoses for people who are near and dear to me. Ack. An explosion at a plant in Texas, and directing most of my compassion fatigue at my poor husband. Ack, 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 ack. The sound of spiritual hairballs, utter frustration, and choking fatigue. It could not have been more than 2 weeks ago that I met with a member of this church who asked me about my faith. They wanted to know where it came from and how I maintained it. They said, I see you sitting up here during the prayers and the songs, and you look so peaceful with your eyes closed, like you really believe it. And I answered a little too neatly, I do believe it. My faith comes from what I've been through. I have faith because I have been through some stuff, I said. And while that is true, I wish I had said that there are weeks like this one where I'm coughing up spiritual hairballs. I wish I had said, yes, God has accompanied me through the valley of the shadow of death on multiple occasions, moved me from despair and hopelessness to green pastures and still waters, but the journey was full of snot. You know? And tears. The trip, the return trip, the multiple trips, the round trips to faith is messy and painful, and sometimes I go back there to the valleys and shadows of death. I told them that God had kept me from losing my mind and my faith, kept me from hating myself and hating others, but Boston and the Senate vote and the destruction in China makes me wish I had said there are weeks when my hold on faith is shakier than I like, shakier than I care to admit. I wish I had said there are times when I have been moving through the valleys and shadows of life, feeling like I am losing my mind and my faith. I wish I had said that on the way to that place of not hating myself and others, I have certainly tarried in the valley of the shadow of death. And there are sisters and brothers, as Christina reminded me this morning, around the world for whom the extraordinary week that we've experienced is normal. Bombs and death and daily terror are normal. This week has been grueling for me. Perhaps some of you feel like me, a little low, a little challenged, a little more in the valleys and shadow than you would like. And while it is completely acceptable to be wherever we are with the events of this week, with the events of life, I wish I had said to that member that some weeks faith is crazy hard. We typically read and preach Psalm 23 at funerals, but it shows up in the lectionary this week in the Easter season when we are celebrating new life in Jesus Christ. What's up with that? I think what's up with that is that Psalm 23 spans our human experience of life, the sweet, bitter of real life. The green meadows and waters of rest alongside the valleys and shadows we attempt to navigate with varying degrees of courage. The sweet, bitter of real life and faith bump around in Psalm 23, where we rediscover or discover for the first time the God who is Emmanuel, God with us. God with us in the sweet, bitter of life. So God is with us in the sweet celebration of 235 sisters and brothers whose volunteer efforts shout down the bitter of life, say no to the bitter of life, tell another story, witness to a God who is with us. Middle Church volunteers are a sure enough witness to the enoughness of God. They witness to the truth that we have all we need to do ministry together in this place. We have each other. And partnered with the Good Shepherd, we are a witness to the resurrection and to new life. Partnered with. Central to this psalm and to our lives of faith is the promise that God is with us. While I've used ak this morning to give life to my spiritual hairballs, in Greek, ak, spelled A-K, means with. And that tiny word with is the pivot that the psalm and our faith turn on. Through all the spiritual hairballs that make us say ak, God is the alternative ak, the Greek ak, the God who is with us in the valleys, with us in the shadows of life and faith. One commentator wrote that in the Hebrew language, when you read Psalm 23, the word at the very center of the psalm, with the same number of words before it and after it, is the word ak, with. The promise of God with us gets us through valleys and shadows and back to believing we have all we need in a God who never leaves us. I am not convinced that we are all ready to walk through the valley of the shadow of death this morning, and that is okay. We may find ourselves sitting in any number of places in the 23rd Psalm and throughout our lives. Some of us may feel we have all we need. Some of us may be in the green meadows or sitting by the still waters. Some of us may be in a place where we are enjoying the table that God has prepared before us. And some of us, like me, may be kicking and screaming in some shadow or another. The shadow of Aurora, the shadow of Oak Creek, the shadow of Hurricane Sandy, the shadow of Sandy Hook, the shadow of our own particular personal life, and even in this resurrection season, the shadow of the cross. And although Jesus is up and out of the grave, I think some of us need a minute to catch our breath and permission to be where we are and to feel what we feel. You have permission. God gives us permission to feel what we feel and to do what we need to do to catch our breath. Wherever you are hanging out in this psalm, one thing I know for sure, God is ak. and Emmanuel, God with us. And I couldn't have received a better reminder that God is Ak and Emmanuel than I received this Friday. I live in the Bronx, and there's a public garden called Wave Hill. I took my daughter there Friday afternoon. There was a beautiful little 2.5-year-old boy playing on the lawn, and I thought, oh, it would be great for Petal to go and play with this child. His mother comes over with her hand outstretched, big smile on her face. She introduces herself, and in the course of talking, she says, "I'm a minister." Nobody ever says that to me. People always say I work at a church, or, So she goes, "I'm a minister, I'm an interfaith minister, and I live in the East Village." I was like, oh, that's really cool. I'm a minister too, and I work in the East Village, and we have some interfaith ministers in our congregation, and I'm like, what's the chance? I say a couple of their names. I think some of them are here, Sierra, Sandy Stone. She's like, oh yeah, Sandy's one of my mentors. And I know Sierra. And I'm like, oh wow, that's so cool. So we start talking about the challenges of the week. And I'm like, how lucky am I that I get to preach this Sunday after all that has happened? And I'm really struggling with the sermon. But this is what I think the hook is. I think the hook is God is with us. And she's like, yeah, I think that's great. I really wish I could be there Sunday morning, but I have another commitment. But I'm gonna come another time. So it starts to sprinkle. And I get Petal, and she picks up her little boy, and they're heading to the parking lot, and we're running for the stroller. And I realized I didn't ask her son's name. And so I cry out, "What's his name?" Petal's beautiful, mischievous little playmate. And she turns back with this same enormous smile, open face, and she says, "Emmanuel." His name's Emmanuel, God with us. Isn't that great, Amber? God with us. And I just lost it, and thankfully it was raining, but I just thought, that's the message. Wherever we're sitting in the psalm or in life today, God is Ak, and God is Emmanuel. And my prayer for you this week is that the God who is Ak and the God who is Emmanuel will be a hope and a comfort for you this week and in the weeks to come. To God be the glory. Amen.